This video may contain what could be considered attorney advertising under the rules of your state. This video is for information purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. If you have a legal problem, it's vital for you to seek out and talk to a licensed attorney for advice. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be. My name is Chris Simmons, attorney at law, and today we're going to talk about sanctuary cities. This is the second of two videos dealing with sanctuary cities. The first dealt with the constitutionality of them, and this video will deal with how they work. Now I need to preface this to say that all of this is dependent on where you live. These are all local laws and they are not uniform across states. So if you want more information on how your particular sanctuary city works, or if you want to attempt to set one up yourself, petition your government, your local government to allow a sanctuary city, you'll need to investigate local laws. But I am going to provide a general overview of how they work. And I'm going to use Chicago as the basis, as that's where I live, and that's the one I'm most familiar with. So, basic idea is that states or cities, because they don't have an immigration law system, they can't, they're simply not going to use their state resources, their limited resources, to enforce federal immigration law. That does not mean that they will prevent Immigration and Custom Enforcement, ICE, to come in and enforce immigration laws. They won't do that. They simply won't cooperate, essentially. So how do they do this? Well, the most direct way of not cooperating, of not using state resources, is through the use of detainers. They will not adhere to a detainer from ICE. What a detainer is a request to hold an immigrant for, normally it's about 48 hours, for ICE to come and pick them up. It has no legal effect. It's not legally binding. It's simply a request. If it were legally binding, it would be a violation of the Anti-Commandeering Clause, and therefore would be a violation of the Constitution. So, state police or local police simply don't abide by detainers. There's an exception, and there's an exception to all of this, and I'll get into that near the end of the video. Another way that sanctuary cities function, some of them allow undocumented immigrants to obtain certain welfare programs, certain social programs. For instance, some will allow the use of SNAP or food stamps, for instance. Some will allow medical insurance through the state, but it all depends on the city. And essentially how they do that is when you are applying, you simply don't have to state if you're a U.S. citizen, if you're from another place, if you are here legally or illegally. You simply apply, and then if you get accepted, then you get those benefits. Not all sanctuary cities function that way, and that is a separate type of sanctuary city. The more common way that sanctuary cities work is that police, law enforcement, and other emergency services will not ask for anything to do with your immigration status. And in fact, some states and some cities don't allow businesses that operate within that area to try and figure out your immigration status. They can't inquire about it. Basically, the reasoning is, well, immigration violations, with the exception of one minor one, are not criminal actions, they are civil actions. So they're not crimes as much as they are civil violations, which are completely different, which have a different set of rules to them. I'll get into that in a future video. But what that means is that states already don't have to enforce federal immigration law. They can't even have their own immigration law. It is in the city's best interest, or the state's best interest, to enforce state and local criminal laws, to catch thieves, to catch murderers, to catch criminals, whether they are violent criminals, petty criminals, whatever type. The state or local government has decided that it is in their best interest to focus their resources on being able to investigate and stop criminal action as opposed to enforcing immigration law. Now, what's the upsides of this? What's the downsides? Well, downsides, if you consider undocumented immigrants a problem, downside is states don't work with federal government to deport undocumented immigrants. Again, one exception we'll get into in a little bit. But the upsides are much, much greater. Again, they're not stopping ICE from coming in and doing it, but what they are allowing is undocumented immigrants and immigrant communities who may be afraid that if they contact the police, they may be mistaken for whatever reason for undocumented immigrants. Maybe they simply left their documentation at home or in the car. They don't have it on them at all times. What that means is they could be mistaken for undocumented immigrants, and it has a chilling effect on their willingness to work with police, to work with emergency services. So what a sanctuary city allows is these people, these immigrants, whether they are documented, undocumented, anything, to report crimes, to report emergencies, to report medical emergencies, fires, all of this, and make their community safer without the fear of deportation. It is a net benefit. So, if you're not in a sanctuary city and someone steals from an undocumented immigrant, they are a thief. They committed theft. They are a criminal. They have done something criminal. But if the undocumented immigrant reports that crime to the police and cooperates with the police, if you're not in a sanctuary city, if you're in a place that does not have this law, there is a chance that the police will inquire about the immigrant's status here. And it puts the immigrant in a very tricky situation. If they admit that they are undocumented, well, they open themselves up to deportation and removal. If they don't, and they lie about it, that opens them up to a lot of other civil penalties. And if they ever hope to immigrate to the United States with documentation, then at that point they've ruined their chances because they've lied about, normally it's being a U.S. citizen. But they've lied about their status, and that goes to a very core part of naturalization, so they're probably never going to get their U.S. citizenship if that's their ultimate goal. LPR status, something similar. So the immigrant basically has a choice. Do I report the theft, or and risk everything, or do I let the thief go and don't risk everything? So it's a chilling effect on criminal reporting. So sanctuary cities function this way. It allows for fires to be fought, for people to get treated more easily, for crimes to be stopped, for more interaction, more comfort between the police and immigrant communities. Sanctuary cities overall are what I would consider a net positive. So there's one exception that I've mentioned, and that is Fort Lee, Chicago. If an immigrant commits a felony, A felony is a crime that is punishable by over 1 year in prison or a penalty over 1 year. And what that means is that these are not your petty theft. This is not things like going and stealing a pack of gum. Stealing, I believe it's less than $500. I'm not a criminal attorney, and I don't remember the exact number, but I believe it's under $500 is not a felony. These people, we have deemed that it is a better use of our resources to simply charge them, convict them, and all that, hold them in prison, make them pay the fine, and then let them go about their way because they're non-violent. If you're a violent criminal, if you've committed a felony, none of this applies to them. The state authorities will will work with ICE to deport you if you are a violent criminal or if you're a felon. That's the exception. So when you hear arguments about sanctuary cities being safe havens for violent criminals, that's actually not true. The police actually work to turn over violent criminals and people with felonies and cooperate with ICE in that case. So that's sanctuary cities in a nutshell. There are a few other small issues that I need to address, but I will do so in another video, unrelated, and that is the difference between criminal and civil violations, which gets into what immigration actually is. And that video is going to take a while, so I'll leave that to another. I hope you've learned. I hope you better understand how sanctuary cities work. And I hope that we can have a more informed discussion around sanctuary cities without all the mischaracterizations of whether they can even exist and without mischaracterizing how they work. If you want to discuss should we have them or not, that might be a valid discussion, but basing it on actual law, actually how they work, is more productive than fear-mongering over how they are perceived to work, but don't actually function. So, I'll see you in the next video.